Before you think this is another verbatim take on what I said about Henry being Bendy, no. This one's a lot more complicated, so buckle up. What we're going to discuss today is one of the most perplexing things in Bendy and the Ink Machine. What we're also discussing is something that might be cleared up or outdated as soon as Dark Revival comes out. And it all starts with the fate of Wally Franks. In case you don't know, Wally Franks was the janitor at Joey Drew Studios. He also tended to the ink machine and worked as a general handyman. He left plenty of audio logs all over the place and kept losing his keys in trash cans every chance he got. A bit of a wisecracker, Wally noticed what was going on in the studio but mostly stuck to his work. There were quite a few people who voiced their opinions that Wally Franks may be the real Bendy or the lost one survivor from the Dark Revival trailer. So, let's start with the devil in the room. Wally Franks would make a perfect Bendy. That is, as far as tune transformation goes. He seems to be on the young side, compared to some of the old-timers around the studio, stays consistently upbeat while making light-hearted cracks about his situation, is somewhat absent-minded. And seems rather clever. Going so far as to rig up systems in Chapter 4 where you can open doors by playing games. These all match the Bendy character to a T. Even his somewhat confrontational relationship with Thomas might mirror how Bendy and Boris are frequently at odds in the cartoon. Not to mention Wally's connection with the ink machine, being the practical caretaker of it. I would actually argue that Wally Franks' profile makes him a better match for Bendy than Henry, since Henry has a slew of traits that don't align with Bendy's. This also lines up with an odd message in Chapter 5 when Wally mentions that he spontaneously found a cake and ate it. Which already sounds suspicious if there wasn't this teaser picture floating around of a cake with ink in it. That alone seems to suggest something dark might have transpired. But here's the catch. At the end of Bendy and the Ink Machine, you can spot letters located in Joey's apartment. We're going to ignore the fact that Joey's letter and his speech at the apartment contain some of the same wording, blurring the lines of which if both of these happened. And instead focus on the contents of these letters which, for all intents and purposes, seem to be real. Wally Franks' letter reveals that he opened a handyman shop, got married, moved to Florida, had kids, has grandkids, and ends the letter proclaiming that he's going to the beach. This seems to all but confirm that Wally left the studio and left this whole ink situation behind him. So, that's it then, right? How could Wally become anyone in the studio when he's living life in sunny Florida? Well, here's where we reach a paradox. Or the paradox. Which involves Allison Pendle and Thomas Connor. Allison Pendle was the voice actor for Alice Angel, taking over when Susie Campbell, who eventually became Twisted Alice, was fired from the role. Thomas Connor was a manager with the Gent Corporation, who built a lot of the machines inside of the studio, including the ink machine, and was brought to the studio to oversee it. The two are romantically involved and eventually get married. Allison also sends a letter going into detail about her life since she left the studio, and Thomas's. They've both been successful and happy, and two have seemed to have left the studio behind them. There's no suggestion in the letter that they plan to come back, but the lines of communication are open. And then we come to Allison Angel and Tom, two ink beings from the depths of the cycle. Not only do they share the names of Pendle and Connor, but they seem to share personalities. Especially Tom, whose gruff and coarse exterior lines up with how Thomas acts in the audio logs. We don't get too much about Pendle and Connor in the Dreams to Life book, but they were together and were aware that something was going on in the studio. Wary of it and even encouraging Buddy to watch himself. From the timeline, they left and went on with their new life where they are now. But Allison and Tom exist, so they must have gone back, right? Well, there's something peculiar here. A few things, really. The wording in the letter suggests that both are busy and are likely not returning to the studio. Pendle and Connor's wariness of the studio and their personalities suggest they would probably also not return after so much time. Also, how wonky must the time in the studio be if Allison and Tom have seemed to be in the studio for a significant amount of time, while this letter might suggest that Allison and Tom were reached out to closer to when Henry was. It is all very confusing and loose, so let me instead pose this theory. Maybe Allison Pendle and Thomas Connor did not return to the studio. Maybe Allison Angel and Tom are echoes of them, clones, ink rebuilt in their image. Like the ink machine tries to rebuild and recreate tunes, it is also trying to recreate employees, getting them mixed up like fish in a bowl. And there is one thing that might explain how Pendle and Connor might have donated themselves to the machine. As stated in Chapter 1 of Bendy and the Ink Machine, everyone of significance at the studio was asked to offer up something of theirs to appease the gods. But what if Joey purposefully did this to get their items to give to the machine, to give it more life or something along those lines? Or perhaps this was an accidental effect. There are 6 objects, though it is unclear which belongs to who, since the objects themselves are pretty standard. So, is it possible that Thomas and Allison's offering caused reborn tunes to be pieces of them, or did they return at an undisclosed time after sending this letter and get swallowed up? Also, the letters themselves, all being sent around the same time. We know Joey isn't as innocent as he seems. Dreams to Life purposefully shows that he's pulling the strings behind some of these events, the ones that aren't happy accidents. And was eagerly willing to effectively sacrifice Buddy for a chance to have the completed Boris. Though before he could lure him away, Buddy got away from him. Keeping this in mind, along with Joey's character and the suspicious nature of him inviting Henry back, we can assume he was planning something with these letters. Allison suggests something of Thomas's was stolen, and we know Joey has a tiny ink machine in his apartment. Joey didn't reach out for Wally ever until right now. Is he reaching out for old time's sake, or is he seeking out the last souls who left the studio? Was Joey planning on luring them in like he did Henry, possibly with the intention of turning them into his perfect creations? It's implied he might have tried something similar on Susie and it didn't work, but he saw Allison as the superior Alice Angel, so he could have wanted to get her back. Also, who was lured in first? The notes being pinned up suggests that they might have been sent before Henry's letter. Maybe he wanted these 3 in particular to fill the allotted roles respectively. But neither of them, or perhaps only 2 of them, took the bait, so then he reached out to Henry. Of course, this could have just been him looking for anyone who would go along with this, and Henry was the last option. Either way, here's what we can deduce. If Allison and Tom are not the original Allison and Thomas and are just clones made by the machine, then yes, Wally could return as an ink person even though he himself escaped the studio. He could be this guy, he could be Bendy. And as I stated in my last video, Bendy playing with toys doesn't discredit this, as he might have adopted the behavior from the character. Though it is also possible that Allison and Thomas returned and Wally simply did not. In which case, no. Wally Franks will likely not be an ink person at all. Because while Allison's letter doesn't seem to suggest she intends to come, she does keep the line open for further communication. Wally's, while friendly, seems to make it very clear that he's happy where he is. It could be that Joey tried luring all 3 in and only Tom and Allison made it, and when Wally didn't come, he sent for Henry instead. Ergo why Henry went in alone. This is the most basic of speculation, but in the end I think I made my point clear. It is, indeed, very possible for Wally to be Bendy, or the lost one, and Henry to be the other that he isn't, or for both to be neither. I can't make a solid confirmation, but I can assure that the option is still on the table. Though if I can add my own bias here. The only thing that would be better than Baby Bendy is Baby Bendy with Wally Franks' voice.
I tell ya, if these guys don't start realizing who the real genius is, I'm out of here.